Hello all. We are here to discuss Budget 2019-20 presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on July 5th, 2019. Center for Public Policy Research published a few articles and a few videos. What are the expectations from the budget 2019? And today we are going to discuss whether our expectations were met by the budget, and we are joined by colleagues from CPPR who is going to discuss on various themes, areas of their expertise, and how budget has been reflected in their expectation list. This budget, in fact, was presented in a very interesting context. Few months ago, everybody anticipated there is a global recession coming in, especially in the context of US-China trade war. 48 hours before the budget, President Trump and President Xi come to, I would even call it as a peace-making process, where they got into a truce where they declared that US-China trade war is going to be suspended, or we could say that at least for the time being, President Trump is not pushing for more tariffs on Chinese imports to USA. Same is the case with the Indian context. Few months ago, hardly anyone believed that the dispensation under Prime Minister Modi will get a thumping majority that we have seen in the elections in May 2019. So the expectations from the budgets are very high, because the government, the sitting government, the party retained the government. It in fact got probably one of the finest majority on the floor of the House. So many expect that the budget could probably give insights to what the government is going to deliver in the next 5 years. On our economic front, the budget discussions, all the discussions leading to the budget were more or less focusing on the revenue deficit that we have, or the fall in the revenue collection in the year 2019, especially in the first quarter of 2019-20. So many believe that this budget could address that. During the election campaign, the themes that were discussed, one, the farmers' distress; second, unemployment problem in this country; third, the financial management of the government. So high anticipation was there when we were approaching the government, when we were approaching the budget. And CPPR also had written articles on the expectations from the budget, let's say on infrastructure, let's say on skill employment generation. We also discussed the governance issues in another article. So here we are going to discuss what all things were met in the budget, and what is the vision that is given by this budget in 2019. And are we happy? What are these common man's problems or the grievances were addressed or not in the budget? This is what we are going to discuss. So the format here today is everyone will speak on their respective subjects and how the budget has dealt with issues and challenges in their area of expertise, and we will have a discussion. So we start with Ghazi. He will speak on, Ghazi is a Senior Research Associate with the Center for Strategic Studies Center for Public Policy Research, and Ghazi will speak on the defense budget and defense allocations first.
Yes. Thank you so much. So, as sir rightly pointed out that this election was fought on various issues such as unemployment was there, farm distress was there, and governance issue was there. So, if you see the whole campaign of the BJP, it was centered around the national security, which they eventually won the election and they secured the second tenure for them. So basically the union budget that was presented by the finance minister, who happened to be the defense minister in the previous government, Mr. Nirmala Sitharaman, it was expected that we might see a huge allocation towards the budget. But if you remember correctly, in February of this year, we had an interim budget, and so the defense outlay was kept unchanged in this budget. So if we talk about the interim budget, basically the issue was to address the modernization as well as the structural reforms in the army. But what we have seen that even if there is 15.5% of the expenditure on of the total central government's expenditure on the defense services, but still out of those 15.5%, majority of it, that is the 2/3 of the allocation that goes to the defense industry, it goes to the salaries and the pensions. Only 1/10 goes to the to buying of the new equipments. So the army itself requires modernization and it requires the reforms in its armed structure, and the recent implementation of the 7th pay commission as well as one rank one pension scheme has cost more than 70% of the budget defense. Right. So from here you can expect that if much of the portion of the defense allocation goes to the salaries and the pensions, only 30% remains for the defense modernization or for doing any structural reforms. If we bisect all the three defense sectors into the three different components, like for the Air Force, for the Indian Navy as well as the Army, it's the Army who gets the major chunk of the defense allocation. Then after that it comes Navy, and then it comes Air Force. But it's very ironic to see that even if they are getting very small amount of money, the Air Force and the Navy, but they are more into modernization and more into buying lots and lots of stuff, defensive procurement from the outside. So some of the biggest projects that are lined up are the S-400 defense missile system that we are buying from the Russians for amount of $5.4 billion, and MH-60 Romeo naval multi-role helicopters that we are buying from United States, which costs around $2.6 billion. So this much is that we are expecting, and they are lined up for acquisitions. So where does money come from? Unless and until we have a proper policy that okay, this much of money should go into the buying of the modernized, for buying in the most sophisticated and the well advanced artillery or the ammunition that are in present time. And on top of it, we should also think that if it is that money that is going into, how much of money that we can allocate to other services, and also to the for the pensions and for the salaries. So if we talk about now that there is a very budget allocation, it seems it barely diverge from a very simple formula. Give army 60%, the Air Force 24%, and remaining give to the Navy. This shows the kind of mindset, okay, that army should be given everything. But equally in this country, challenges are multi-front. We cannot right away give all our defense expenditure, majority chunk of the expenditure to the army. What about the other forces also, which are equally important? So if we talk about the present challenges that we have challenges not only in the northern front, we also have challenges in the on the maritime front itself. Because if we talk about maritime is becoming much and more important than it comes to the landlocked borders. So if we talk about the maritime challenges itself, China is coming in our own backyard. So unless we need to counter that, and for that we need to have major, no, I won't say major, but a significant amount of this our budget allocation towards the Navy building, towards the Air Force building. If we want to secure our maritime borders. If we talk about the northern side where the army is on the forefront, so let's talk about the western front with Pakistan. Yes, definitely there is asymmetric conflict that is going on there, but at the same time we need to secure our borders. It is not only that army on its own can do it with little amount of budget for the restructuring, for the modernization, for buying arts and artillery, for buying the bulletproof beds. It is not only that will help us. Okay, it is the joint collaboration of all the three powers, all the three this sectors or the three spheres that they can contribute to it. Right. So I think. Let's hope that the budget, whatever has been allocated to the defense industry, let's hope that it will live up to the expectations of not only the modernization but also for buying sophisticated weaponry in order to secure its in order to for India to secure its national interest. This is what I have to talk about the budget on defense.
Thanks, Yasi. It has been an excellent start for our discussion here. So next we have Dr. Anupama Ghosh to discuss employment generation, skill development.
So as far as unemployment or employment generation is concerned, it has been a major roadblock. It had been a major roadblock for the Modi government even in its first tenure. Remember that in 2014, one of the promises that the Modi government or the BJP did was on the job front that they will do a lot of employment generation. And so there were a lot of schemes that were initiated. There were like Make in India, Startup India, Stand Up India, and a lot other schemes were introduced, whereas various other schemes have been revamped and were given allocation, or their structures were changed a bit. But interestingly, in 2019, the NSSO data came up, which put the unemployment figures in the country at almost a 4 decades high. So with the BJP government coming back to power, and with a thumping majority as the overwhelming majority that they have come up with, the budget was taken as a blueprint or as a roadmap for what the government will do to kind of factor in those issues which are impediments to the employment generation as such. So here in this discussion, I'll just take up a few schemes and the way that budget has been allocated to them, and what has really happened in some of those sectors in which these schemes have were promised to generate some employment. So if one of the first scheme that I'll take up is the MGNREGA, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Generation Act. And this was an older scheme. A lot of budget allocation had been done, and as far as the last 5 years are concerned, they are all about the unemployment in the rural sector. Okay, we have farm distress, we have agrarian distress, we have migrations from the rural to the urban areas, and in this it seems that the rural India was actually suffering a lot. And if we actually see the budget allocation this year, it has drastically gone down. It has actually gone down from the previous years. And this comes at a time when there's an interesting letter, an open letter, which was written by Narega Sangharsh Yojana, which talked about long delays in wage payments or even non-payments in certain cases. So there was a lot of, a lot of people in the rural areas were actually turning away from these schemes. Okay, and in such a situation where we are talking about more and more people going away from, migrating from rural to urban areas, where they might not be skilled for certain urban jobs. They are migrating, and in few years where we have seen droughts coming up, we might have expected a lot more allocation, or at least some specific allocation, considerable allocation for the scheme, but this has surprisingly gone down. So the question that kind of remains here is what about the rural employment? Was rural employment are there schemes, more schemes which are coming up which can generate more rural employment? So in the budget, which I noticed and many of others also noticed, was there was a lot of impetus that was given to the micro, small and medium enterprises. And then there's this Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program, which aims at generation of employment opportunities through establishment of micro enterprises, okay, in rural as well as in urban areas. And this scheme actually got an all-time high allocation. Okay, so this was one of the good takeaways from as far as the budget 2019 was concerned. Then there were also some schemes and certain sectors which were kind of left open-ended. So when Nirmala Sitharaman was presenting her budget, she's talking about the entrepreneurs in India and how how the government is going to promote entrepreneurship in the country in the next 5 years. So she gave a lot of impetus on the startup India. So she talked about television programs being launched and how FDI into certain sectors of entrepreneurs will be introduced. But as such as the budget allocation for the specific scheme, Startup India, that scheme, that has actually gone down. Okay. So this was actually is there really a disconnect? Is there really a misarrangement somewhere where how that allocation is being done? On what basis these allocations have been done, and also regarding the fact that she did not give out any kind of numbers as such as far as her scheme, as far as her budget was concerned. Then one was Make in India, another flagship initiative of the Modi government in the first tenure, and which obviously promised to make India manufacturing hubs and therefore bringing in more employment. That has its allocation has gone up tremendously. Okay, almost like from it has received almost 473 crores. Okay, which is earlier in the revised estimate it was 149 crores, so it has got a lot more. One of the reason why it might have got, because there are certain components within this scheme. So like there was the Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushalya Yojana, which was a fragment of the Make in India program, and it aimed at benefiting the rural youth. But over the past 5 years, it has only generated around 5 lakh placements. It has not done anything more than 5 lakh in 5 years. Similar was the Deen Dayal Antodaya Yojana, which was for urban livelihood, and it also saw a placement of 4.72 lakh youth in 5 years. So this kind of an allocation, it might have been, like sir was discussing, that there are inter-ministries and ministries set up their recommendations, but this had been again a good takeaway for that certain schemes which might not have worked for certain reason, they have been allocated more. And as far as as far as employment or unemployment is concerned, I think that is a big concern for the country right now. Okay, whether whether we are believing the data, whether there's a lot of concern on which data to actually believe. But the point is that there is unemployment. There is unemployment in various sectors, and did actually the budget address those? In some senses, it did not. It did not, in the sense that some of there was a disconnect in some of the schemes, and there was in some of them, like, impetus been given to certain sectors. But again, is there even when we are talking about the startups or the entrepreneurs, or we are talking about the startups, so why have certain schemes not worked? Okay, was budget allocation a problem, or is budget allocation the way forward? Okay, so that is something that I think needs to be worked upon or discussed more. Okay, yes, so it's mostly about the earlier schemes, looking at also the earlier schemes and their failures, and getting takeaways from there, and making a roadmap for the next coming 5 years. Yes, I think that would be from me.
Thanks, Anupama. So we go with education now, and Angela.
Okay, so I looked at the education sector, and especially when we look at the past budgetary commitments, we have seen a gradual decline for the sector. But then we had the new education policy that came up, and everyone anticipated an increase in the budget. And with 94,853 crores, we did see an increase in the funds, but everyone was quick to point out that we still haven't reached the 6% level as recommended by the Kothari Commission. Then when we talk about the funding for the education sector, 2 points that came up a lot was so in the past couple of years, the government has ended up merging a lot of schemes. So there's a lot of funding that also has been merged. So because of that, we are actually facing a lack of funds for schemes that used to have a lot of funds. And on top of that, when you look at the CMI reports, there has been an underspending in the higher education sector. So not only do we not have the money, we're also not spending the money that we do have. Then apart from the NEP, couple of things that the finance minister spoke about was India's potential to become an educational hub, the Study in India initiative, and a focus on new age skills. Now when we look at, so after the NEP was announced and the draft called for a revamp of the sector, everyone anticipated that the focus will now be on the quality of education and on teacher training. But that hasn't been the case. We are still looking at world-class institutions, whereas we should shift the focus to world-class education. Because when we focus just on institutions, it gets narrowed down to the elite institutions, which ends up catering to probably 5% of the students who are going in for higher education. So we still are not addressing the quality part of it. Now, while the proposal to attract foreign students is a good initiative, we need to make our institutions attractive for our students so that we can avoid the brain drain that we are facing. And another part when it comes to teacher training is that while NEP had spoken a lot about this part, when it comes to the budget allocation, we only have 125 crores, which is a significant climb down from the 871 crores that we had for 18-19. So those were the...
What is the last one?
Right now, the budget has only allocated 125 crores for teacher training. Whereas in the 18-19 budget estimate, we had 871 crores for teacher training and adult education. So those were a couple of points that came up during education.
So I was particularly interested about the investment trends and the fiscal capability of the government to meet its budget proposition, because the budget speech made it amply clear that government is strictly on the path of fiscal consolidation, and that signals less government intervention and more emphasis on investment. So the growth is estimated to be 8%, and we have an ambitious target of reaching $5 trillion in the next 5 years, and that means that we have to have an investment which pushes itself to 40% of the GDP. Now, if I may just quote some figures on the investment front. India's gross fixed capital formation showed a decline in 2012 from 34.3% to 28.22% in 2016. And the trend was reversed by a very slight margin to 28.87% of GDP only recently. So for India to reach that ambitious target of $5 trillion, we need to push the investments to 40% of the GDP, and that's a huge gap from what it is currently. Also, after the proposition of the surcharge on high net worth individual, the government can definitely garner revenues from the high net worth individual by the surcharge that they've declared, but the move can also be extremely counterproductive because it might dampen the investment in the economy.
And also they can move out of the country.
Exactly, and so that is one aspect that we need to look at, and this is also not very aligned to the emphasis government was making on boosting the investments. Another aspect that I was particularly interested was the corporate tax bracket. It has been increased. The corporate bracket of 25% has been extended to various other organizations whose turnover is around 400 crores. So this might act as an incentive for those falling in the bracket of 250 crore turnover to expand their business operation. So that is likely to propel economic growth, but that is likely to happen only in the long run. However, what we see in the short run is that it might result in the downslide of the revenue receipts. So with an already dipping revenue receipts that we see, the GST revenues have been constantly falling, and there is a serious, very serious concern on how government can meet all of these budget propositions with the revenue that they have now. One might argue that the strategic plan of disinvestment might boost the revenues and can create a fiscal space to meet all of the demands. However, if you look at the trends that happened in the last year, in FY19, government could only achieve 43% of the budgeted target of 80,000 crore from the PSU sale. But the disinvestment program for FY20 is pitched at a massive figure of 1.05 lakh crore. So given the track record, it's a very challenging task for the government to meet this target. And if this entire discourse shows that the government is likely to overshoot its fiscal deficit, and if that happens, the private investments will be offset. Yeah.
So next we have Gopinath to discuss on infrastructure.
Infrastructure was one of the main thrust areas of the government, and that was also reflected in the budget. As Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, she started off with infrastructure sector. So it is said that an investment of 100 lakh crores is announced for the next 5 years, and the minister also stressed on the importance of investment-driven infrastructure. Another important observation was that no major schemes were announced in this budget. It was the schemes which had already continued, which were taken forward, and these were discussed during this budget. So now I'll be talking about some of the schemes and some of the sectors within the infrastructure domain. So physical connectivity was one of the main areas which the government has focused and will be focusing. So there are some of the major schemes under physical connectivity where Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, industrial corridors, dedicated freight networks, Bharat Malas and the Sagar Mala projects. Under Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, so in the previous government, the previous budget allocated, it was said that if the government had planned, the earlier government had planned to complete the project by 2022 to provide rural connectivity throughout India, but then in case they'll have to reduce that to 2019, then additional budget should have been provided. But even in this budget, we can see that there has been no change in the budget allocated for this particular scheme. So there is a question as how will the government actually achieve that target which has been already proposed. Now coming to the second project, that is the Sagar Mala project. So the Sagar Mala project actually aims at developing port-led development throughout the country. And it remains the amount, the budget allocated for that is 600 crores, which is again only 63% of what was previously estimated. The project had experienced budgetary restrictions due to the enormity of scale of operations, but that has not been adequately addressed in this budget. Because there is only an increase of 50 crores in the budget estimated for this particular project. Now coming on to the National Highway Program. So a comprehensive restructuring is envisaged for the National Highway Program, wherein the government is also proposing the state to help in creating the National Highway Grid, which is actually a very positive signal because now the gap between the different implementing agencies can be reduced because many of the stakeholders are actually involved in this process. And we can also expect better outcomes through this scheme. UDAN scheme, which is which was proposed in the previous government, is planned to continue the scheme, but then no proper allocation of budget for this particular scheme is mentioned in the budget document. Though Minister have announced the scheme in her budget speech, but then there is a lack of clarity on what is the exact budget which is proposed in the scheme. So, and also the scheme is envisaged to diminish the rural-urban divide by providing regional connectivity to Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities throughout the country. Coming on to the railway sector, in the budget speech it was mentioned that 50 lakh crores is needed for developing the railway infrastructure within the country, and for the same, the government will have to depend on private-public partnership and other financing sources. But then again, there is a lack of clarity on the exact roadmap of how this private participation can be taken into the sector. And the minister had also suggested that in order to increase the investment in the suburban railway, it can be done by setting up an SPV. But we could see that an SPV was already set up for National High Speed Rail Corporation, but the implementation of that high speed elevated rail network is making slow progress. So again, by creating another SPV, how efficiently are we planning the whole system is again a question which needs to be addressed. Sustainable development was another major focus of this government, which was also mentioned in their manifesto. E-vehicles, promoting e-vehicles is one of the main focus areas of this government, and for the same, different provisions have been proposed, like they have lowered the GST rate on electric vehicles from 12% to 5%. In addition to that, the government has also proposed a reduction in the income tax deduction of rupees 1.5 lakhs on the loans to purchase electric vehicles. So these, along with other regulatory barriers which have been reduced in the e-vehicle sector, is actually supporting electric vehicles and promoting electric vehicles in the country. But again, promoting electric vehicles will have another perspective, because the number of private vehicles will be increasing on the whole, which again might have an increased pressure in the other infrastructure. So that again needs to be seen from a different perspective. Now coming on to affordable housing, a total enhanced reduction of 3.5 lakhs was earlier announced. Now an additional reduction of rupees 1.5 lakhs is proposed in this budget, but these are only available for loans which are borrowed before March 2020. So that the time span or the period till 2020, that is again a very less so that again will raise some questions on the efficiency of the scheme, because we don't know till 2020 what are the number of beneficiaries who can actually gain from the scheme. One of the main flagship initiatives of the Modi government was the Smart Cities mission, but then in the budget speech, it was nowhere mentioned actually, the Smart City missions or the other urban rejuvenation mission, which is the Amrut mission. But considering the amount allocated, almost 97% of the fund allocated for smart cities were utilized, which compared to the previous year's budget, which gives us an idea that more fund is needed for this project, but only a 9% of increase in the fund is being provided for this particular mission. So on the whole, the budget presented by the finance minister, it was more like a vision statement which did not provide a clear roadmap on how to procure, fund or finance different projects or schemes. Though there is a mention of setting up an expert committee to address the infrastructure financing challenges in the budget. So yes, we'll hope the committee will give a better suggestion or clarity on how to give the fund. Thank you.
Thank you all for giving insights on various thematic areas, I would say, the subjects that the budget tried to cover. So I think we get a sense of what this budget consists of. I mean, meaning the budget is, what are the areas the budget is focusing on. There are a few areas actually I thought of, if people mention some of the missing elements, like the larger invitation for the public-private partnership in many sectors, whether it is in agriculture or in infrastructure, even in school education and all. We are talking about private-public participation. In the financial market, for example, there is an announcement in budget that talks about the delisting of the companies. Up to 35% of the company shares should be given to the public. But the inadvertent consequence of that, given India's family-run business and the trust, I think it is going to be a big challenge, because most of the companies, most of the families are not going to, I mean, they are not in a position to delist the shares up to through a threshold of 35%. Today it is 25%. 10% more, delisting is not an easy route that many say. They probably, then what will happen is, those companies, they were listed in the stock exchange or the financial markets, they may go back to the earlier category classification where they become private companies, not the public limited companies, right? So that will have a huge implication on the financial market. The other one I thought of like discuss here is we talked a lot about agriculture. In agriculture sector, in fact, there's a huge allocation. The reason for that huge allocation is we have this Prime Minister's support scheme for the farmers, 6,000 rupees per year. So that cost around 70,000 crores, even though the first cabinet meeting that Modi chaired in the second term had declared that they are going to raise it to, to everyone, instead of select families. The budget that was, the estimate budget that time quoted was 87,000 crores. But the budget documents actually talks about 70,000 crores. So I don't know where that 17,000 crores that, the first cabinet meeting, what they decided is going to come from. And because of the reason, the allocation in the agriculture sector is around 1,40,000 crores. So 70,000 crores will go to that scheme. So remaining 70,000 crores will be in the actual, agriculture planning and development. But that is also higher than what was allocated last time. It was around 56,000 crores last time. So it is now 70,000 crores. So and another expectation from the budget was that in order to address this employment distress, there could be they may announce steps, how to tackle this problem. So probably, when finance minister talked about labor rules, the codification of 44 rules into 4 codes, that is what she meant. But this is not a new announcement. This announcement was made in 2015 in the first Modi regime, and nothing much happened afterwards. Even though government tried to do their best, but I think the trade unions were not ready to accept some of the reform package that Modi government announced, or the template that they had shared with everybody. So it is up to the government to come to a consensus with all the stakeholders to introduce these reforms now. And now talking about the education policy, the new education policy still is a draft policy. 30th of June was the last day to give the suggestions and comments to the draft they shared by first week of June. So I think we can give benefit of doubt to the government, but still they have allocated 4,400 crores for creation of National Education Fund and the National Research Foundation. So that is well received, and I think many say that that's a right step, the first step in the right direction to create a national research fund. But many other provisions, many people contest some of the suggestions given by the national education policy, including the centralization of the education at the national level, higher education level. Many believe that it should be given to the state level, and they let them decide what they want to do at the higher education, in the higher education level. But more money is allocated to the school education. And another one is all the skill development projects and the both Kaushal Skill Development Yojana and Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Antyodaya project. I think the issue is not something new. I mean, the challenge that we're facing on the front is not something new. This all skill development project was introduced by UPA government, and the last, let's say, 8-9 years, we have been facing this problem. Even though we have, we have programs, and we also have certified skilled people coming out of this centers, but I think where are they getting opportunities? Where are they getting a job? No documentation as such. There is no reliable documentation on all these things. So the idea of on the issue of fiscal deficit and how we are going to manage the 3.3 is very surprising that after the budget presentation, Finance Minister again, she moves this bill, and then she says like, oh, sorry, probably you are so worried about the physical deficit target. Then she, she mentions, this year we have revised to 3.3. I think that is that shows that, or was it something that they don't want to discuss on the floor of the house, or it was because of probably media might ask this question later afternoon press conference, the customary press conference that Finance Minister does. That probably the reason why she tried to mention this is 3.3 physical target now. But many doubt the numbers, because how do we manage it? The problem here is, I think there are two ways to do this 5 trillion US dollar economy. One is your savings rate in bank should be increased from 31 to around 40%, and your private consumption should be reduced from 59% to 50%, and then your investment per GDP should be raised to some 45%. But the problem here is, how do we attain that? Like Nisi discussed, how are we going to attain this number? Because there's a long way to reach those numbers. So here the issue comes. The issue here is government, in fact, instead of I sometimes doubt their intention as such, because they believe that the foreign direct investment could probably substitute the savings and investment per GDP. So this is our domestic savings that we are talking about. It's not about somebody is investing to India and then, even if you are not reaching that 40% target, that savings per GDP, that could be compromised and, by attracting foreign direct investment to the country. So that front we need more clarity how government is planning to do that. Then on defense budget, there is also discussion on the tactical steps and strategic steps that the Indian defense establishment should take. So is it whether we need to spend more money on pension and salary, or should we get into the tactical warfares, cyber warfare, technology? We should have more improvement the technical side of the warfare. Technology could be deployed to fight wars instead of going for mass recruitment drive, because most of the countries, including China, UK, they all decided to reduce the artillery part of the defense. So they are not recruiting. Even Modi had stated it in his first tenure that we should also adopt that thing instead of 13 lakh people employed in defense sector. So that's the way probably we can reduce the salary, pension, and so whatever happened. But this is a global thought, not confined to India. This is a global thought that we should actually improve our technology framework on the war front. So that is where the money has to be spent, not for disbursing salaries. So, and MNREJ, my understanding is that this time also they increase the budget allocation. It's to 67,000 crores from 60,000 crores. Okay. Okay. So, but this is something that Modi said last time, right? If at all I have to have the legacy, let's have the MNRG as a legacy of the Congress government. Probably that is what. Okay, I give it that benefit of doubt for you. But I think I see. I'm doing it for last few years. The budget thing. This budget, not a populist budget. The budget is kind of a policy document. If you are a policy researcher, great to understand the nitty-gritties of what projects our government is trying to roll out in the next 5 years. But at the same time, I think the old governance style of government of India is changing. I mean, we see it. Just compare, let's say, 2014 Modi budget and 2019 Modi budget. You see a huge difference the way they look at the governance issues. So if you look at 2006 budget and 2019 budget, I think there's a huge difference. So the whole governance structure is changing and improving, and that is truly reflected in the budget. So I think it will go and go, and it will go in this direction in the future also. And I think that is a positive step for me as a policy researcher.